Welcome to Hurdling 201. Hopefully you've already watched Hurdling 101 because that lays the groundwork for what I'm going to talk about here. I'm going to pick it up from there and take you to the point where you're racing really well and hopefully in the fast heat at most meets. Because this video is going to be relatively long and include several different sections in it, I'm going to have chapters in it so you can move around wherever you need. You can see links in the notes below. We're going to start off by talking about the technique that you should be using to hurdle faster. For that, we're going to use my hurdle technique cheat sheet. I've included a link in the email that I sent you, and we're going to watch the reference video here. When analyzing technique from the start to the first hurdle, you want to look at two things. One is their acceleration, and also making sure they don't slow down at the first hurdle. The other is how many steps are they taking. We're going to start off by focusing on the acceleration and the slowing down. We do this by looking at what we call negative shin angle. That means that as the athlete comes out of the block, when their foot strikes the ground, you want to make sure that it's well behind their knee. You can see that with all of these athletes here. This is what is referred to as negative shin angle because that foot is behind the knee. With the lead athletes, they'll do that with at least 4 steps, sometimes more. For most high schoolers, you're lucky to get 4 good steps out of them. Then we want to look at the next 4 steps leading up to the hurdles. A lot of high schoolers tend to reach out and strike the ground with their heels. That's a sure sign that they're actually slowing down before the hurdle, and you want to stop that. You want to make sure that the athlete is not doing that and striking the ground on the balls of their feet. As for the steps to the hurdle, the only time you want to consider 7 steps to the first hurdle is if you have someone who's exceptionally tall and fast, and even then you want to make sure those steps have negative shin angle. For all the other hurdles, it's similar. You want to make sure they're maintaining speed and they're not reaching out and landing on their heels, but they're landing on the balls of their feet underneath their center of mass, and it's especially important on the last step as they go over the hurdle. When it comes to the takeoff distance to the hurdle, it really can depend. It's going to be anywhere from 6.5 feet or 2 meters to about 7.5 feet and almost 2.5 meters. It really can depend on the height of the athlete, the speed of the athlete, and their overall style. I've had high school girls who take off from 7 feet and also very good high school boys who are taking off even closer. So it really can be a personal issue. You just want to make sure they have enough space so they don't have to swing their lead leg around from one side or the other and can bring it up straight without hitting the hurdle. For the lead leg, you want to make sure it goes through the proper cycle. What you're looking for here is that the heel comes right up against the butt, stays there as long as possible, and then it extends towards the hurdle. And then you also look for the height of the knee. Ideally, the knee doesn't reach a height that's much higher than the top of the hurdle. The lead arm should be bent and extend straight out from the shoulder, and the trail arm should be bent, ideally at about 90 degrees. Another thing to look for as they approach the hurdle is their plant leg. For boys or men, the leg should be almost fully extended when they take off. Girls and women, because of the height of the hurdle, can get away with a slightly lesser extension, but it's still pretty close to fully extended. But overall, what you want to see with the plant leg is to see a direction that is a good angle towards the hurdle. Too many younger athletes have high angles, which is definitely going to set them up for jumping high. When the athlete's above the hurdle, you want to look for a lead leg that's not fully extended, but also not too bent. Boys and men have to lean pretty hard into the hurdle. That's because of the height of the hurdle relative to their body height. Women, on the other hand, because their hurdle is lower, don't have to lean quite so much. Trail arm positions when they're directly above the hurdles is very similar to when they're approaching the hurdle. Their arms should be bent at 90 degrees and held behind them. Their lead arm should be 90 degrees or greater and only in front of their body and definitely not crossing the midline. Here are some good examples. Also, as they're on top of the hurdle, they should tuck their heel closely into their butt as they start their descent. Here's another good example here. As they descend the hurdle, the athlete's lead arm should swing back and their hand should travel right past their trail knee. This is what we call sweeping the knee. The trail arm should swing powerfully through as in a running motion. And as they bring that arm through, they should also try to push their hips forward. The trail leg comes through with the lower part of that leg being parallel to the ground. And as the athlete continues to descend, the knee extends forward. For women and girls, their knee doesn't have to come much higher than their hips. But for men and boys, again, because of the height of the hurdle, their knee has to go much higher. A lot of times it's described as coming through your armpit. The goal is to land as close to the hurdle as possible. This is because the more time that you spend in the air, the slower you're going to be, and as soon as you can touch down, you can get back to running as soon as possible. The hurdler's position at touchdown really tells us a lot. When their toe touches down, their lower leg should be straight up and their thigh slightly leaning back. As soon as they bring the whole foot down, ideally their hip is directly above their heel and they're almost in an upright position. Boys will still have a very high knee close to their chest, but girls' upper leg will be parallel to the ground. When we look at the running between the hurdles, it actually starts with the trail leg. The trail leg should be a powerful step to the first hurdle and come down very strong. Ideally, the athletes are running with good sprint technique and landing on the balls of their feet, but with high schoolers, even good ones, that is sometimes challenging because there's so much energy involved in getting to the next hurdle in 3 steps. So there might still be some striking the ground on their heels, and you have to afford some grace for that. Overall, you just want to make sure that they're not reaching out very far and landing on their heels, and they're getting their legs as much underneath them as possible. In the 100 and 110 meter hurdles, this same concept applies whether the athlete is doing 3 steps or 4 steps between the hurdles. Now that you understand the technique that we're striving for, how do you develop that? Well, that's done with my hurdle warm-up progression. Just like I did with the technique, I'm going to play a video here, but I'm also going to include a link in your email if you want to download an outline. Then we transition into walking drills. This is walking on your heels. I want you to feel a tension in your shin area. I believe this minimizes your chance of shin splints. And then we're walking on our toes so that we can get our calf muscles ready to contract. And then we go from heel to toe just to warm up those muscles even further. We do about 10 repetitions on each leg for all of these movements. And now we do sort of a march with a high knee and a twist into it. Again, just to start working on some range of motion. All the motions that we do in our walking drills should be slow and controlled to avoid any momentum created. Now, this is the way we work on hamstring flexibility. You want to do a march where you lift your knees up about as high as your hip. Try to hold it there as you extend your knee. And you'll feel a stretch on your hamstring and a tightness on your quad. And this is the open and close the gait. We're just working on hip flexibility. Again, slow and controlled. And now we do something we call ice skaters, where they're trying to reach back and grab their toes. This you'll feel a nice tension in the muscles on the back, but also a stretch in all the muscles in the front. Again, nice and slow and controlled. And then just for the sake of getting the muscles even more ready, we'll go into squats. We do 5 regular squats. And then we do 5 squats pushing in on the knee to work on your glutes, and then 5 squats pushing out on your knee, warming up your hip flexors. And because I always want to reinforce proper foot striking mechanics, I have them jump in place 10 times so they can land on the balls of their feet, transition that into jogging in place for 10 repetitions, and then they take 1 or 2 laps depending on the time of year and how in shape they are. Once they get back, we set up the hurdles and do our hurdle progression. We start off doing a walking hurdle drill where they're bringing their lead leg straight up over the hurdle and their trail leg in a proper trail leg motion, and also try to have proper arm mechanics. Beginners, I would recommend not adding the arms and only focusing on the legs. And then we'll do it twice, so we do it with each leg. I do all drills with both legs just so that we have balance in our body. Now we do a similar thing where we're stepping over both hurdles. This is just to really get your hips warmed up and just get used to having a high knee on and a lot of front side mechanics on the things that you're working on. We'll do it twice just for the added repetition. Then, as awkward as they seem on this, we do the same thing going backwards. Again, this is just to get your hips really warmed up for how much mobility you need in the hurdle process. And then we do a sidestepping drill. Carson does a good job at this. If you have an athlete that has a hard time going over the hurdles, my athletes will just do the same thing but to the side so they don't actually have to go over the hurdle. And if you notice, for the boys and the girls, they have them mixed up and they're all doing 30 inches on this. It really doesn't matter. And then we raise every other hurdle to 39 inches. And then they step over one, squat under the other, and repeat this with both sides. This is really just to now put a lot of gravity into the squat and really working on the rotation and the flexibility and range of motion of your hips. Then we separate the boys and girls hurdles so they can continue with their drills. And the spacing that we had there works fine. The boys will lower it to either 36 or 33 inches. Here we'll do what's called a hanging trail leg, where you put one leg over the hurdle and then very quickly you snap your trail leg down to the ground as fast as possible. This helps you work on your speed clearing the hurdle. And then with the hurdle spaced out the same way, we go into one-step skipping drills, starting off with the trail leg. Make sure we have good trail leg mechanics as well as good arm mechanics. And they do both sides. And then once they finish trail leg, they work on their lead leg, making sure the knee goes straight over the hurdle and then snap the leg down quickly. After that, we spread the hurdles out to about 8 to 10 walking stride lengths. And I have the athletes jog over it with a 3-step drill, first doing a trail leg drill. And we'll do 1 to 2 times each side, so we work on both legs. This is Leah's bad leg. You can tell here that this is Jack's bad leg. Now this is working on the lead leg. Leah's still trying to master that drill. Carson has it down pretty good. Jack has it down really well. And then we go over the hurdle, and we'll go over 1 or 2 times with each leg. Always trying to work on good mechanics. So now that you understand the technique and how you develop it, what are we going to do if you have something that's not working right? Say a little flaw in one of your aspects of the technique. First, understand that that's normal. All hurdlers have that, and they're always on this never-ending cycle of trying to get better. So if you have a big problem, what you do is you go back to the Hurdle 101 approach, where you isolate the movement and you go from standing to walking to skipping to jogging. But for all problems that you have, even the small tweaks, what you want to do is really focus on them during the drills. And for example, let's say you have 3 things you're working on. We'll call them problem A, problem B, and problem C. What I recommend is during the warm-up progression, once you spread the hurdles out where it's like 8 to 10 walking steps, and you're running about 60, 70% of your top speed, you're going to go over those hurdles 4 times. So for example, the first time through, you're going to work on problem A. The second time you go over it, you focus only on problem B. Third time, really focus on problem C. And the fourth time you go over, you want to pull it all together and do it all really good with one perfect repetition. And you got to remember, just because you can do something at a slow speed doesn't always mean that you can do it at full speed. So you want to take the same concept that I just described and apply it to your full speed training as well. Now, when it comes to your training, you want to plan things out properly. You want to make sure you're doing all the right things throughout a whole week, say Monday through Saturday, but also you want to think about how you're doing things within each given session. Here's the overall order that your hurdle practices need to take. First, you have the warm-up, then the drills, then the full speed work, then the off-speed work, and then your speed and conditioning training. Best to do this type of work early in the session before the athletes get fatigued, and I recommend limiting the repetitions to a minimum. Depending on the time of the season and your goals for the workout, you may want to do more hurdle training than what I just recommended. In that case, I recommend reducing the spacing of the hurdles to where the athletes can clear them while running with approximately 50 to 75% of their top speed. This enables them to focus on technique without having to work so hard to reach the next hurdle. This also saves their legs and cuts down on injury. Because hurdlers are sprinters, they need speed and endurance just like everyone else. This is the part of the workout that should be saved for the end of the session. If you're looking for more detail in your hurdle workouts and training, you should consider my hurdle training plan. That's a very detailed 60-page document that tells you all of your workouts that you should do from the beginning of the season to the end of the season and all the progression that you should have there so you end up being really great when you need to be great, which is in the championship. Now let's talk about racing strategy. Well, first we're going to talk about the sprint hurdles, the 100 and 110 meter hurdles. It might surprise you, but I like to keep the instruction to my hurdlers very simple at this point. I tell them this: first, just go out as fast as you can and don't slow down at the hurdles. The other thing is you want to run with quick steps and tight arms. And then third, whatever main thing that is their issue in their technique, I'll allow them to focus on that one thing, but that's it. I don't want to overload them or bombard them with too many things to think about when they're racing and it messes them up. I just really want them to focus on going out and being fast and crisp. When it comes to the 300 and 400 hurdles, that's a lot more complicated and can be so different depending on the individual athlete. So here are some segments from a video I already recorded. The key to success in this event is to maintain your speed and energy throughout the race. Don't slow down or take stutter steps because it wastes energy and speed. To maintain speed, you need to have a choreographed race plan to reach each hurdle with the proper distance to clear it with your preferred lead leg. Or you can just run fast to each hurdle and clear it with whichever leg shows up. I personally recommend having a combination of both approaches, having a goal for the optimal steps for each hurdle, but being prepared to adjust as needed. Unlike the 100 and 110 meter hurdles, technique in the 300 meter hurdles is not as strict. Even the best hurdlers in the world don't use perfect technique while racing in this event. Good form is mostly about maintaining your speed and energy. Remember, fast and ugly beats slow and pretty in this race. To run the 300 meter hurdle successfully, you should be prepared to use all of your energy by the time you cross the finish line. Your goal should be to go out fast and try to maintain your speed while conserving as much energy as possible. When you start to fatigue, which usually happens around the 200 meter mark, you need to focus on good form and turnover to get over the last hurdles and the finish line. During the race, you'll likely start off with longer strides and fewer steps, but as the race goes on, you'll probably evolve down into shorter steps as you fatigue. That's because your stride will naturally shorten. So know this and be prepared for it. Your stride should be more relaxed and allow for more backside recovery than with short sprinting, which helps conserve energy. For the start to the first hurdle, girls typically take 24 steps and boys take 22 steps in faster heats, but it may vary depending on your speed and stride length. If you're stuttering, consider switching legs in the blocks or take fewer steps. Girls typically take 17 to 19 steps between the second and third hurdle, while boys take 15 to 17 steps between each hurdle. Athletes with a lot of speed often have issues being too close to these hurdles early in the race. If that's the case, you could benefit from taking one less step at each hurdle to maintain your speed and efficiency. Of course, that means using the opposite lead leg. The fourth or fifth hurdles can be different experiences for different types of hurdlers. Hurdlers with a lot of speed tend to settle into good steps at this point, while those that made it smoothly over the first 3 hurdles tend to stutter or lose momentum because fatigue is starting to set in and their strides are beginning to shorten. If you find yourself in this situation, you need to make a conscious decision to either maintain your stride length or shorten it to decrease your stride length. Now that we're here, let's talk about hurdling in a curve. A lot of hurdlers don't like going over a hurdle when it's angled a bit. So what they'll do is they'll drift over to the outside half of the lane and then angle in to go over the hurdle straight. It also keeps them from landing in the wrong lane. By the time you get to the last 100 meters of this race, you'll likely be taking 2 more steps than you were at hurdles 2 and 3. This is perfectly normal, and you shouldn't try to fight it by taking long, slow strides. Instead, focus on maintaining your speed and good form and fast turnover of your legs. That's it for Hurdling 201. If you can understand and conquer everything that you learned here, you're going to be ahead of about 90% of your competitors in what you know and what your ability is. And once you do that, you're ready for 301, which is the elite stuff. I hope to see you there.